Hello, Sumana. Welcome.
Hi.
Hey, folks. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm going to give everyone about another minute or two to join, and then we can get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So it looks like we have a light agenda today. One thing that I know we need to do is to move this meeting a little bit later so that other folks can still attend in US-based time zones. We're trying to be EMEA friendly, but I think I'll send out a poll later just to find a different time that will work better for everyone, because I think that was one of the requests from our last meeting 4 weeks ago at this point. So first off, I want to welcome anyone that's new to the meeting. I know at least one person, Sumana, is new. Sumana, do you want to just say hello and give us a heads up who you are and who you represent?
Sure. My name is Sumana. My pronouns are she, her. I live in New York City and I do work on Python packaging. I have an independent consultancy, and through that, I've contracted in the past with the Python Software Foundation to improve PyPI and pip and related things. Currently, I have a gig with NYU to further work on securing the Python packaging supply chain. And I also do work with other open source projects, but that's what's relevant here.
Yeah, and to add a little more context, Sumana has been a project manager on a lot of security focused projects for PyPI in the past, and also the NYU folks are the ones that have worked on tough and related things. So glad to have you here. And Cheng Lei, looks like you're here as well.
Yep. So hi, I'm Cheng Lei. I'm a engineer with Anaconda, and I'm here representing mostly the Conda ecosystem. That includes Anaconda and Conda Forge and some of the other larger partner channels that we have.
Cool. Very welcome to have you both. Anyone else new?
Yeah, I'm also new. Sebastian Awad. I'm also at Anaconda. I was with the Secure Systems Lab at NYU previously. I wrote the upstream reference implementation. I maintained Tough for a while. So yeah, hey Simona. Yeah.
Awesome, welcome. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Jack. I'm new to this call, but I've been on other OpenSSF calls. I'm working at Control Plane, a kind of cloud native consultancy, but I want to promote Nix packages and securing that kind of area of things.
Very cool. Welcome. Anyone else?
Yeah, hello. I am Diego Rodriguez. I am one of the Conan co-founders. Conan is a C++ package manager.
Great to have you here. So yeah, is there anyone else?
Yeah,
Hey.
So okay. Go ahead.
I attended last meeting, but I didn't introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Waichu. I'm formerly of Gradle. I'm no longer part of Gradle. I'm a software security researcher. I'm currently doing the Dan Kaminsky Fellowship under Human Security. So I focus on security of open source software and sometimes the supply chain stuff. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Jack. Likewise in New York. Likewise been on other OpenSSF calls, and I'm here representing Alma Linux and our package ecosystem.
Awesome, welcome. Anybody else?
Well, yeah, sorry, Gus. I'm Simon Kent. I'm from Google. I'm new with the open source security team here, working on supply chain integrity.
And Azra?
Hey, this is my first time attending this working group, and I've been kind of involved in other meetings. So maybe you've seen me at Six Store stuff where we're digital working identity, but I work at Google. I'm on the team with Bob and Simon et al. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the meeting.
Mikhail.
Yep, Mikhail Barbero. I work for the Eclipse Foundation, so I'm leading the supply chain security initiative at the foundation, and so working on OSS dev best practices for the foundation.
Glad to have you. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Julie. I work at Google also on the Go security team.
Julie, I'm not sure if you're aware, but your avatar is a crossed out camera right now. I'm not sure if that's on purpose or not. Just want to let you know.
Oh.
No problem. Anybody else? Cool. So usually we'll review some action items from our last meeting, which was 2 weeks ago, and then go through agenda items. I want to highlight something real quick for new attendees. One thing that this group has been working on, and I'm especially thinking about the Conan maintainers, Anaconda maintainers here. We're working on a sort of a survey of these ecosystems, these similar technologies of software repositories across ecosystems and the features that they provide. So one thing that we've done is for some of the folks that have been in the meetings in the past, we've sort of filled out this feature matrix of important security features that all these repositories share, and then sort of the level of support or intent for each of these ecosystems. So like you'll see on this spreadsheet, there's PyPI and NPM, and Drupal folks have filled out a column for them as well, that kind of thing. I would love to see Conan represented here. The Python column can be split into pip and conda if there's distinctly separate features there, etc. So one like kind of broad action item I'd like to ask new folks here to think about is go and take a look at that. If you haven't seen it before, see if your ecosystem is accurately represented there. But also if your ecosystem is just not present, please take it on yourself to add a column to add it, because we would like to try to make this as comprehensive, at least for folks that have been attending this and participating in this working group as possible. Questions at a high level about the survey itself?
Yeah, actually, so we filled it out for Conan. Where do we submit it?
So did you edit the spreadsheet itself, or you filled it out separately somewhere else?
Yeah, it was, I don't think we had edit access, so we forked it.
Okay. If you can request access to the doc, anyone
Okay.
that's in the working group should, in the like groups.io group, should have access to this document. It's in the shared drive for the working group, but just ping me and I'll figure out permissions and stuff if you don't have the right stuff. Or ask in the Slack channel, anywhere's fine, we can figure that out. But yeah, I'd like to have it in the doc. Yeah, David.
All right, awesome.
Yeah, real quick.
Go ahead.
I noticed in a few cases, people, I guess there was one aggressive no or something like that, don't agree that should be a security feature. I think that's great. I mean, it's okay to say no and that you don't plan to, and there's a reason. This is just a cross compare, and if there's an issue with an approach, then it's good to know that. Thanks.
I left a quick question I left a question in the chat about, or in the Discord, Slack chat about adding some questions around previous security audits that have been performed against, like, have you as an organization ever had a pen test of your, repository offering? Are those questions that wanted to be included, or is that probably relevant for another survey later?
I'll let others chime in. My thought is like the survey is kind of binary right now, and it sort of represents forward progress. So maybe an audit is something that wouldn't just happen once, and we'd want to be able to repeat that. I think it probably is good to sort of capture like some general stance towards auditing whether something has been done in the past. But
right, that's mostly. I'm just asking has it ever occurred in the past ever? Right, that I know that is not the case for some repositories, that no audit has ever occurred ever.
Yeah, other folks have, I see Jack and Jonathan have hands up, or John, sorry, you still have your hand up. Anyone else have thoughts?
So I'm just looking at the Google Sheet doc, and I'm slightly confused by the columns, F onwards. So for something like Nix packages, where we package many different ecosystems, would we put like multiple columns under each of these headers, or would there need to be another higher level header? Like, for example, we'll package individual Rust binaries, but then we also have like a definition of separate crates as individual libraries. Similarly, we've got like individual NPM libraries kind of packaged in a separate way, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, case, right? Because this is the first time we're dealing with a distribution where they have the package management over the package management.
Yeah, I would argue that Conda would be roughly in the same category as Nix. I mean, we started out with Python, but we now represent a large number of ecosystems.
So I'd say for these like kind of meta distribution mechanisms, if there's like significant differences in the way that they distribute stuff for one ecosystem versus another, maybe it makes sense to break it out in a similar way. But if a lot of these are just like kind of security focused things, some of them might not even apply, right? Like things about namespacing, whether like 2FA, like if people aren't actually like publishing directly and you're just sort of reconsuming and redistributing. So I think like this matrix is fairly flexible, and I'd like to be able to modify it to include as many organizations as possible. David?
Yeah, I agree. Flexibility and try to try to find the best way to capture it. I would think that, for example, if you are packaging up something that you got from the Rust ecosystem, for example, the goal will be to capture what's different, not what's in the Rust ecosystem, which would be its own column. So I'm hoping that that what will be captured in those other columns would be what you do differently, and not including things that are captured in other columns.
Okay.
And if that doesn't make sense, then let's talk and do something else. That would be my guess. But I mean, whatever makes sense, I think, is the correct answer.
Okay, I'll have a read through the individual rows and see what applies. But yeah, for some libraries we just grab it. For other libraries we grab it and then modify it, patch it to make it work. But yeah, I'll have a read.
The other thing I'll say is the sort of ultimate goal of this, excuse me, is kind of twofold. One, in short term, we're working on a blog post that's sort of just going to highlight some unique features that we think are important that different ecosystems have. Longer term, this should help us motivate what to focus on in which ecosystems. Like if there is an ecosystem that is missing a feature that other ecosystems consider to be important, this group should be a way for us to help that ecosystem level up and get that feature and figure out how to implement it, that kind of thing. So if you have something very unique to your ecosystem, I think we definitely want to hear about it. Any other questions on that? I didn't intend for that to take so much time, but I'm glad to have the discussion.
Yeah, I just want to add that if you see something that you feel like should be included, just make a comment and I can kind of go in and add different roles for it as well.
Yep, and we have highlighted rows that have been added recently as well. So if you haven't, I'll go back and take a second look. Okay, cool. I'm going to move on to reviewing our action items from last meeting. We came to an agreement on who is considered a member of the working group, and we approved the pull request to adopt a charter. And these other ones have not been completed, so I don't think Miles has scheduled any meetings to my knowledge, and Zach is not here, correct? Yeah, I think Zach is probably gonna.
I think Zach is out. Most of the chain guard folks are at an offsite this week. One thing to note is that the namespacing doc was folded into the existing guide to Sigstore. He sort of has been working on it there. So it's a section in there. It seems pretty comprehensive. It's worth a read for folks who haven't seen it yet. I will dig out the link and put it into the chat for folks.
Cool. I'll just ask him to follow up on these. And I think that's it. Okay, moving on. And thanks, Jacques, for raising that. Our working group has been approved. If anyone isn't aware, we were sort of in working group purgatory for a little while. We had to have a certain number of meetings before we became an official working group of the OpenSSF, and that has happened. The TAC has approved our working group. There's a blog post about that, just sort of at a high level describing what we're doing. Thanks to everyone that attended the first couple of meetings and made that possible and contributed to the chart and everything else. Really appreciate that. Any questions about our status as a working group? Okay, moving on. Azra, you have a item here about attestation bundle formats.
Hey, yeah, I think we've had some more discussion since I posted this, but I wanted to call out a problem that I think a lot of us have been thinking about in terms of how do we like find and discover and also make sure that find and discover attestations and also find and discover their associated verification material. And so that two problems, the general discoverability of attestations and then the packaging of the verification material. The latter one, I think we've come to a resolution that most of that material should be within an envelope. So aside from that problem though, I do think the question of discoverability is still a little bit open. And so this kind of comes into play with the software repository setting where we say like how do I find all, like, how do I package all the attestations that I need? And what do I do if some of those attestations are out of band? For example, a very large SBOM. And so unfortunately though, since doing this, I think I'm going to focus on the latter problem and you know, I'm going to focus on like including all of the verification material inside envelope with respect to how SigStore produces things. So if you're interested in more, like feel free to look at that issue and contact me, especially if you have some ideas about how maybe you're thinking about doing this. And I will follow up, I guess, in the next coming meetings if there's any more resolution or updates about the general discoverability and bundling problem.
Yeah, Jacques.
I just wanted to make sure I sort of understood what we're discussing. So if I was to put it in terms that I think of in the Ruby Gems proposal, one of our open questions is we put stuff into the transparency log that says so-and-so is the author of this package. You know, we call that signing, but really it's an authorial attestation. And then at some point we want to cache that next to the gem file, like next to the .gem. Right, in the same bucket, going through the same CDN so that the client doesn't have to keep going back to recall every time. It has the same mechanism for downloading the signature or the attestation as it does for downloading the .gem. Is that what you're talking about?
Just to clarify what you mean, when you say stuff in the transparency log and you're putting that side by side, are you talking about like a signature and collection, or are you talking about the material needed to verify the recore entry offline?
Oh, good question. The thing we're looking at is essentially what is currently the hashed record. So it's got the public certificate, it's got the signature, and the other sort of metadata that are attached to those to tie them together. That's part of it. So that's necessary to like verify the .gem file, the actual blob. In terms of verifying the veracity of the signature itself, like that we trust this record came from Recore and that we trust that Recore is properly set up and that the keys are all lined up, that's something we see as doing, but not first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so how do we verify the veracity of the signature is what I was tackling with, let's put it inside the envelope. But you do call out the point that this doesn't really support non-rich attestations. I've only been thinking about things in terms of provenance, and provenances are put into in-toto statements that have that envelope layer where I can stick all this information in it. But when you're looking at just a raw signature, like your hashed recore D type, that is still an open question. So I think I will follow up on that issue with that. Because what you're saying basically is like, how do we format the recore entry type along with, you know, this extra information about,
and we've been interested in that problem because A, we're going to have to solve it. And B, it seems like something everybody's going to have to solve. Like everybody's got their CDNs and their buckets and so on and so forth. And all their clients are designed to talk to that CDN and that bucket. And also we don't want the entire universe hammering recall all the time unnecessarily. So it seems like it will be a shared problem. And I was interested in that envelope format. And I was curious if that's what you were working on or if it was something else. And it sounds like it's overlapping, but not exactly the same.
Yeah, I think so. Your use case, I think, is just for the signature on the package, not for like an attestation, right? And I don't know if someone is more familiar with the Intoto framework than I am, but is it possible to put a non-rich attestation, so just a raw signature, into an envelope? So can we leverage the support for the envelope I'm about to add to include the recore information, but for just a raw signature?
See, Marina's hand is up.
I'm not sure I can answer that particular question, but I am working on a similar problem that I wanted to just bring up. In Uptane, actually, we're looking at incorporating Intoto into Uptane. And these kind of bandwidth bundling questions have also come up there, where round trips across the network are a lot harder in vehicles because of the way that the internet connections work. And so I'm very curious to see how we can figure out how to bundle this stuff, because there are a lot of different files you end up verifying in Intoto for various different things. And it would be nice to make that process a little bit more efficient.
Sorry, Jack, I'm just going to jump in after what Marina said, which is that there's also a sort of a wrinkle, which is that, as some of you know, I have the view that we will add more attestation types to describe the entire life cycle of a package and record that to the public log. So for example, there should be an entry in recore that says this package was uploaded by this person at this time, and that's signed by the repository itself and not by the end user. And then things like account has been created, MFA has been enabled, group ownership membership has changed, all of these sort of security sensitive events. I haven't thought through the question of whether those should be stored by side or not. So I think that goes to what you were saying, Marina, is like, would we be trying to come up with like an Uber format that contains all of the events that are related to a .gem file, or to actually a jar? I'll say a jar. See, I'm not completely ignorant of other ecosystems. Or whether it would still be something where if you want to look into those more detailed things, you look sideways into recore. So that's just a thought bubble. I hope it was worth it, Jack.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. This comment is separate to kind of the SIG store stuff. I'm very interested in how we'll be linking artifacts to provenance and SBOMs and such. But within Nix packages, we have something that's a bit like an attestation of provenance, and it's also a bit like an SBOM at the same time, in that it shows kind of every other kind of package that went into making that package, and also the definition is essentially linked to that with a hash. I'm not explaining it particularly well, but there's a nice chunk of information in the PhD that was originally written about Nix as a functional package manager. But I don't know, maybe some of the kind of the hashing aspects could come in handy here. I'll add a link to the doc.
That would be great. I think also some of us are thinking about, in particular with the SBOM story, that hashes can be used to sort of traverse logs that have extra information and linkages to other docs. So I think that comes up with that discoverability piece. But I think my AI or takeaway here, especially with Jacques' use cases, expanding more on that issue that I thought I had mostly resolved, to support just the general signature case. And hopefully that I can follow up with you, Jacques, and see how can I even include that recore veracity information into that format for just a signature.
Cool. Jack, I see your hand still up. I think that's old. Is there anyone else that has any comments or questions? David?
I just threw a link into the notes on a link to the SIG store documentation, where it does talk specifically about what a SIG store does and some of its current integrations, which doesn't mean that all problems are solved, but at least at least there is some information out there about how it integrates with some other things. And some other folks may have a better knowledge than I do, but I know it can sign all sorts of, I mean, it can sign arbitrary blobs of data. They've tried to be careful about what actually gets directly recorded versus what's, I mean, you can hash anything, but there's limits on what's actually recorded directly in the because otherwise people tend to do some unpleasant things if you can directly modify what's put in the public log. And other people may be able to explain that better than I have.
Essentially, the original design had it that you sent the whole blob to record to be consumed, which was pretty juicy attack vector for somebody sending an infinite stream, just to tie up a process for a while. I see Bob's got his hand up, so when he gets to the run, he'll probably correct me.
I think Sebastian also had his hand up first. I don't know if there's a related discussion or not, but
yeah, a little bit, but if Bob has some sort of technical clarification, you may as well go first.
Yeah, I was just going to say the original design was there because we needed the entire artifact to be able to verify the digital signature for particular implementations. In general, we do not store the content of artifacts in the log. The one exception for that is in toto attestations. So we will actually persist those as part of the overall entry. But to the typical entry where you're sending us a signature, we have to have the information in order to verify it's valid before we're going to put it into log. That's the overall policy in terms of our trust model. That we have to independently verify that the signature is correct before we'll put it into the log. So if for example PGP, we need the full message to be able to do that. For mini-sign or ED 25519, where there's 2 passes in order to compute the hash function over the message, we need the full message to be able to do that. So, but the intent is for us to not be a package manager in and of itself and a general content addressable store for all artifacts and statements on the web. That's not the intent.
Thanks, Bob. Sebastian.
So discoverability is a security feature, right? I mean, so are there existing recommendations for creating expectations like client requirements around the supplementary information in an attestation on a transparency log period or on Recore in particular? Like I assume not, but just in case I'm sort of asking. And the purpose would be like to facilitate discoverability, right? You want something inside inside a signed payload that forces discoverability. For example, a package manager might, or any authentication stream might want to see a label that marks it as relevant to X, Y, or Z inside the signature or inside the data signed in order to make it to force discoverability.
I was just gonna say, I think that's a great point, and also something that was raised to me recently was that just because Recore is an open entry, anyone can write any entry about any artifact they want in there. So being able to discover entries that you trust or care about, filter the overall log in some way, I think is really important. Maybe Bob or Ozra can sort of talk to search features for Recore or filtering features that are in progress.
I will try, but I think the answer is TBD. But yeah, just to reiterate that point, like indexing for hash basically like opens you up to, anyone can create an artifact on Recore that is linked to that hash. So you can't just sort of like search without filtering capabilities. The filtering capabilities, I suppose you can do like on that public key and decide who you trust, which you can do by just parsing that artifact. But I think, I think there's been multiple use cases of like, let's do, searches that are more complex, like, join two, like find the intersection of two particular searches. So I think it's TBD still. I just know that there's been use cases that I've had and I'm hearing now as well.
like the attack scenario that we thought of for Ruby gems is that somebody sees the digest of a particular .gem file and then they spam 1 billion entries. And so when rubygems.org goes to look it up, it's there forever churning through all of those entries, which would be sad.
Sounds like the alternative is that Recore churns through 1 billion entries, but maybe there's a nicer way we can do that.
I'm happier to let Recore do it.
Well, then Recore either has to churn through those or it has to have some persistent state over which is the trusted uploader, right? Which just fundamentally changes the entire dynamic here. So I agree that it's an issue that we need to work on more. I think there's been technical discussions around how much of that we need to build into Recore proper versus build into an external search index that then just goes back and queries the individual log, because bolting on a knowledge graph and a search engine on top of a transparency log or a set of logs is a non-trivial exercise. So it's an area that we know needs work, but to Ozra's point, it's still very much in a TBD state. So if folks have particular interest in collaborating there, would love to connect and talk.
Yeah, so I'm hearing maybe there's like 2 action items out of this discussion. One is first, maybe there needs to be some issue or feature request for Recore just to explore these discoverability features, search features, that kind of thing, if that doesn't already exist.
I think it does. I can find a link and put it in the notes.
Okay. And the other is like Ozra, I think it would be interesting for everyone here to sort of be able to read and comment on a doc that describes how you're thinking about attestation bundles. And I have a sense that you might have a draft of that. So turning that into something that we can share here and have folks chime in on might be a good action item for you if you're willing.
Sure. Yeah, I can clean up that that draft doc there and share it next meeting that we have.
Awesome. Thank you. Anything else about attestation bundles or searching Recore discoverability? Okay, great. Thanks everyone for that discussion. The last thing that I have on the agenda, I kind of just wanted to check in with everyone about language native SigStore and tough clients for your ecosystem. So one thing that's in progress right now, I know that there is a SigStore Java and SigStore Python client being written, which are implementing a subset of cosign's blob signing features. And the sort of impetus for these are that those ecosystems most likely want to use a native client, most likely want to have importable library and not be calling out to cosign on the command line. I suspect that there's a demand in other ecosystems, and I kind of want to just get a check from folks here, and I can, we'll share this out more widely afterwards as well, but whether there are other ecosystems that are also thinking about these things or working on similar clients, and whether there's overlap. One thing we've been discussing is being able to test all of these in a similar way. So kind of interested to hear. Yeah, Trevor.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we are planning to start on my team SigStore.js. I've had a couple of conversations with Dan and Lawrence about it. So yeah, absolutely looking to do that to be able to support the NPM use cases.
Is there an existing like NPM or node based tough client for like getting the root keys and things like that?
No, not that I know of. This is something that we're trying to bake into an RFC and then start to work on. We've got some sort of internal discussions to have on it first, but we just as part of being able to propose some direct support for SigStore within NPM CLI, we're looking to start to build out the toolkit that we need.
So is the plan to just build a SIG-Store client into NPM itself, or like maybe not the plan, but like the idea?
Yeah, I don't want to describe the plan as such too much before we actually put out the RFC, because that's kind of the right process to do. But that the basic idea is kind of being able to directly support it within the CLI.
Yeah, Jacques.
Yeah, pretty similar for Ruby gems. The prototype that we have does things, so to speak, by hand. So we, I mean, not everything, we use no-auth library and so forth, but in terms of the actual interaction with SIG-Store, we all do that inside the client code. We don't have a library abstracted out or anything like that. Though it had never occurred to me, and as far as I know, to us.
And does that, for Ruby gems, does that also include tough related stuff? Is that all kind of implemented by hand in the client?
We don't have a tough thing at the moment. I'm not sure if there's a tough gem. So I couldn't give you a firm answer there. But I think if I was to sort of like go with what my original thinking was, is I was thinking the same way we were thinking about SIG-Store, which is that we would implement it in the client. So one of the constraints on the implementation for Ruby gems is that the gem CLI only relies on either the standard library of Ruby or a very small number of vendor gems. And so to prevent that ballooning massively with dependencies, especially through OAuth, the plan is that the signing part of the code would come as a plugin. And with tough, if it's sufficiently complex, it might be that the verifying side of the code is also a plugin that gets downloaded automatically at first use. That's slightly up in the air, but yeah, that's the main constraint on us, is that we're trying to ensure that the gem client doesn't become too heavily burdened with dependencies. It's kind of a tricky road, because we also don't want to write all the code ourselves. That would be silly.
So for these two ecosystems, at least that have chimed in so far, Node and Ruby gems, it sounds like baking these things into the clients is kind of roughly the plan, maybe as plugins, but do you predict that there might be any demand for like SIG-Store as a library in your ecosystem? Something that would allow users to sign things that aren't done directly through the, through NPM or through the installer or whatever?
Truthfully, I don't think so. Dangerous to speak for hundreds of thousands in the case of Ruby, or millions of people in the case of NPM. But I don't see an immediate case.
Yarn.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I mean, for NPM, there's also Yarn. So there are other package downloaders other than NPM.
Yeah, that's part of our motivation for specifically creating a library.
Okay, so I guess my sort of follow-up question in here is like, I personally think it'd be beneficial for us to have a unified way to test these clients. Like all these are going to implement kind of similar signing features, verification features. And what I kind of want to propose is like for folks that are working on these clients for their repositories or planning to integrate these into the package managers, for us to try and find a common way to ensure that they're valid and just do some, at least some at first, some basic testing against them, just to ensure that they kind of do the same things. If folks are interested in that, I guess follow up with me. I think I'm probably planning to share a little doc about what that might look like in our next meeting. But yeah, that's kind of the idea. Any other questions or comments here? Okay, cool. Thanks, Joseph. Any other agenda items? That's the end of our agenda.
Sure, why not? So I think that the whole topic of signing is like really important, but like getting back to the basics, like the fundamental things that are actually going to protect. You know, the biggest thing for attackers currently are going after you know, accounts that don't have 2FA enabled, and you know, actual vulnerabilities in the packaging managers themselves that are kind of more fundamental than like these like chains of trust sort of things. What support, pressure, thoughts are people having in terms of like taking care of? I know that there's the audit, right? The overall, like, let's look at that from the thousands of view. What kind of support, plans, thoughts, ideas are people having around just taking care of the basic fundamental sort of things that these packaging systems and tools need to have or should have? Yeah, that's kind of where that's kicking around my head.
Yeah, Jacques.
I have an answer in 3 parts, so strap in. The first part is that I think the survey that we have going, the spreadsheet, is a really good place to start in terms of like teasing out what different folks are thinking about or have thought about. I think the second, for 2-factor authentication, at least in Ruby, we're pushing that pretty hard. The policy is going to change so that at least the owners of the top 100 gems have to have 2FA enabled, and that will slowly roll down the hierarchy until ideally everyone has to do it. And in terms of the repository itself, yes. So if I put on my Shopify hat for a second instead of my Ruby ecosystem hat, we have a team where we're working on RubyGems and rubygems.org, and we're thinking a lot about security supply chain. And so we do think about 2FA, and we do think about gem signing. The feedback from the people who are the true maintainers of RubyGems and rubygems.org has been, those are really good, and we're definitely keen on 2FA, and we are enthusiastic about gem signing, but we also need your help with the day-to-day stuff that you're talking about. So looking at error reports, looking at bug bounty reports. So we're also committing to do a bunch of that as well, to basically, because it, as you say, it needs to be done. There's sort of this strange tension, though, between the point that gem signing gives you a great deal of resistance against repository compromise versus resisting repository compromise in the repository. And so we're sort of navigating that tension in terms of how we divide our work amongst the people that we have to work on things. So that's going to be an ongoing process. And by we, I mean Shopify, the folks that we have working on the team. Does that answer your question, or does that just muddy the waters?
No, I think it helps clarify the kind of solution for Shopify and for the Ruby Gems ecosystem, which is great. Which, you know, that's awesome. I think that one of the things that's been kicking around my head for years is like, well, GitHub bought NPM, and now NPM is like, probably one of the only package ecosystems out there that has a team that is like, NPM has an incident response team now, right? Like that kind of core problem of like packaging ecosystems. So yeah, just I think that what you're saying for Ruby Gems is awesome, great. Like I'm glad that Shopify is throwing some weight behind there. What pressure, what support can be provided in other areas as well? Like let's continue this sort of work, right? And that's kind of one of the questions that I wanted to ask in the survey, right? Around like have security audits been performed against your repository? Because I know that from experience and from people that I've talked to in this space, the answer most often is no, because the repository, most companies that sell software, right, they get customers that come in and say, hey, like before we're going to buy your software, we need you to do a security audit. We need you to do a pen test of your software, right? Because the repository is provided free, That's never been a requirement. It's never been specified by any end user because it's provided for free, right? So there's no hiring team, there's no security team involved in auditing this tool before you're buying it. And so for the most part, most of these companies and organizations that are running these artifact servers have never had the financial sort of need to spend money to invest into actually getting these tools audited. On my behalf, I found a bunch of vulnerabilities in the Gradle plugin portal before I joined Gradle that were very kind of low-hanging fruit sort of vulnerabilities, right? I joined Gradle and I fixed a bunch of stuff internally, but you know, it's some of that speaks to, you know, the financial motivations. And so how can we start shining a spotlight on those problems and start encouraging these organizations that are running these big ecosystems to start making those shifts and start throwing money into those problems?
Savannah, do you mind if I answer that quickly? Thank you. Yes, I'm hopeful that very selfishly, I'm hoping that our example is an example that gets set and that folks in various ecosystems and within the Ruby ecosystem too become more involved. I think it's been the case for Shopify, and this is me speaking with a personal opinion and not officially, that we understood our dependence on Rails and we understood our dependence on Ruby, and it's not until recently we really deeply grokked our dependence on Ruby gems in the same way. And I'm hoping that other companies are going through, with the resources to really put the shoulder behind it, they're going through the same experience. The second thing I would say is that in terms of like a collective effort or a collective approach to these problems and supporting from a collective pool, I feel as though that's what the Alpha Omega project that OpenSSF is operating is partly about, and that repository managers are obvious candidates for such a program. Now, Alpha Omega is nascent for those who are not familiar with it. The Alpha refers to very high touch, very personalized attention and support from the OpenSSF, for example, paying for exactly those kinds of security audits and penetration tests and attention from security professionals. And also, you know, trying to build up the security posture of the projects that get interacted with. So I encourage those of you who haven't seen Alpha Omega to have a look at it. They're starting with Node.js, but I'm pretty sure the package managers will be in the cohort of like the first 100 who get talked to. I'd be fairly confident.
I was under the impression, because I thought Alpha Omega scope was primarily the open source software that was actually open source, and most of the repository code is not itself open source, and so would not be under the purview of Alpha Omega.
I don't know about other package managers. I know that RubyGems.org is open source. And I think a lot of it is. The point being, I don't think there would be a point at which we would like have a Stallman moment and stomp our feet and leave the room about that topic.
No, right? No, that's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think we would be very practical. Like I'm using the royal we here. Like I think folks who work on Alpha Omega would be very practical. They're very practical folks, and so I don't think they would see that as a fatal obstacle. I've talked a lot though, so I should let Samana go.
Yes, please.
Yeah, now I know what you mean when you say you want to jump in quickly. I think that I really appreciate Jonathan's question because of a few things, right? So one is, yeah, how, especially when a package manager is the only game in town and there's no competition, and in that particular ecosystem or no strong competition, it's very difficult to incentivize adoption of some feature and so on. So I think there's a few things to think about when you asked about like support plans, thoughts, and ideas. One is getting the users of that ecosystem to push and say this is a priority to them, especially the corporate users, by making them aware of what they're missing out on. So this is something that Tidelift has done. I linked, and it's in the notes now. In 2019, the Tidelift blog published, okay, here's the state of 2FA across a bunch of different package managers and languages. I don't know if there's anything more recent that's public somewhere. I'd like to know about it. Because there has been an advancement in the last 3 years. Another thing that's going to happen is because of the US government's cybersecurity directives and the executive order that got signed last year about securing the open source or securing the software supply chain now being a new U.S. national government priority, there's going to be new, regulations, hopefully new investment about what level of security in a supply chain is necessary in order for something to be used by a U.S. government department. And so I think that might end up leading to a number of organizations in software spaces where the package managers don't currently support or require 2FA, investing in or pushing for that to happen in those package managers, because they would like to be able to sell their software to the Department of Defense and everything else. That's my guess. I mean, that's not something that I'm just going to wait around for to happen, right? I, like everybody else here, I'm going to be pushing for it as well. But I think advocating to make it not just, oh, well, this would be nice, but no, this is a requirement, and there's a hard stop if we don't have this, through standard setting, through regulation setting, and also through clamor and investment from users is going to be really important.
Huge plus one. Cheng?
Yeah, so I think particularly for the Conda ecosystem and possibly for something like Nix, I think the other thing we're starting to think about is our ecosystem. One is a loose confederation of packages rather than anything that's driven by a single organization. So for example, Anaconda, Conda Forge, BioConda have some cross collaboration, but even within the context of Conda Forge, for example, like the core team works on a few dozen maybe out of the 17,000 plus packages that are there. And then beyond that, we're also dependent on other ecosystems, package security, right? Like we build things from Python, obviously, but we're also tied to the R ecosystem, the NPM, Rust, Go, Haskell for some reason. So I think for our ecosystem in particular is, I think we are ended up in a weird place where we're a nexus of a lot of supply chains, and then trying to figure out when a user or when one of our customers says, I am using this Conda package, it's like, well, who did you get, which Conda channel did you get this from? Because, even something as basic as this version has vulnerability may not actually be true depending on whether that package manager for that feedstock happened to have patched it. Right, so even for ICU, for example, is one of the ones we recently dealt with. Like our version of ICU was patched and Conda Forge's isn't. So the security posture of a package and version is like package name and version is not sufficient. Right, because there are multiple channels and multiple repositories. And I think that's one of the challenges we're trying to think through on the Conda side is, and then especially if you look at BioConda, for instance, the biologists writing software, right? Like, I don't know that they may have a desire to secure their supply chain, but then whether they have the technical capacity or honestly the money to do it is a whole other question.
Bob?
Yeah, the only thing I was just gonna, maybe is just more of a reminder, but probably more of a plus one as well, is that to Jonathan's previous question of kind of like, how do we motivate the broader work in this space? I mean, I think that's what personally I was super excited about when we, going back a couple of meetings, talked about kind of goals and anti-goals of this particular working group. I think the opportunity for us is to continue to nurture that survey and come back with recommendations, and they don't necessarily have to be, uniformly agreed to, but if we can come to a consensus view of here are the top 3 things that we see as needed to focus on from the broader OpenSSF, whether that naturally fits into existing programs through Alpha Omega or other initiatives, or whether there needs to be a call to the TAC and the governing board to go focus on these top 3 things that would really move the needle across the broad space of the package manager ecosystems represented on this call. I think that in itself is a huge win that I know, speaking with my TAC hat on, I know would be a very welcome conversation to have. So I guess I would just say, like, the purpose of this survey is not just to kind of, not only to recapture the state of the state right now, but it's more to unlock opportunities where we do see shared viewpoints of common issues, common threats, where we need that greater level of focus and investment, where the OpenSSF can hopefully provide additional funding and additional focus. So I would just say, let's keep the conversation going and make sure that we get to that point to where the output of this group is actionable, and not just a gripe session.
I absolutely agree. I think that okay, so I guess one of the things that I would appreciate seeing on the form that's not on the form, and I think I've said this a couple times, and I just, can we add to that survey the question of, you know, do you perform regular security audits of the repository, right? Can we add those questions to the survey so that we can get those answers, and then have those sort of discussions be coming from, because currently it's just been like something that I'm mentioning, but it's not in the survey. So I think that it's something that we should consider actually adding to the survey, is saying, like, do you get regular audits? Have you been audited before? You know, do you have a vulnerability disclosure program? You know, those three kind of big questions on these of these repository maintainers should be added to the survey.
Yep. Brandon, can I ask you to follow up with Jonathan to make sure that his ideas for missing features are included in the survey?
Yeah, I can do that, and it'll be helpful if Jonathan can create a comment on it, so at least we can track it and we can kind of add discussions, make sure that the text is according to what you're thinking.
Yeah, there's a thread in the Slack channel, but you want me to also add that as a comment in the document too?
Yeah, I think that'll be easier to, just so everything is in the same place.
Thanks.
Great, thanks.
We're right at time, which is awesome. I think that probably resolves that discussion there, at least for now. It sounds like there's some, like Bob was saying, we need to think about broader work, how we can surface what we find, make recommendations upwards into the OpenSSF. That should be our role as experts in this space, I think. So just let's make that our focus going forward. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Keep in mind, our next meeting will be in 2 weeks, and this meeting will be rescheduled slightly later to allow for more folks to join in the future. But
Quick question.
Yeah, take care.
Quick question. Is the Slack channel getting renamed because it's now an official working group, or is there a new working group Slack channel? Because all the other working groups have WG in front of them.
I will rename it. Thank you for catching that, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks all. Take care.